Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the American dream, which is the common economic ethos that drives the United States and a lot of the perceived social contract of the country. However, that's not the only country that has an economic aspirational ethos help define its social contract. The European Union and China have similar quote-unquote dreams. I'm going to compare all three in this upcoming video. The first of these economic ethos models is the American dream, and it's the most famous one because it does influence a lot of the behavior and a lot of the ambition of careers of many young Americans to this day, and also is a big motivator for immigrants who come to this country from across the world and a big driver of why they do. The American dream essentially centers around the idea that due to the United States' high levels of economic freedom, anybody from anywhere really has a chance to become wealthy. If you put in the work, you will eventually succeed. It doesn't really matter about certain things such as whether you speak English as a first language, ethnic background, religion. You've seen people from the most, in their home countries, the most discriminated against or the least favorable economic upbringings, or people who've been on the wrong side of a conflict and lost everything and have come to the United States and rebuilt within a generation or two, and sometimes even on themselves. America's reputation for innovation and entrepreneurialism and the relative forgiveness of bankruptcies and startup failure culturally in the United States allows people to be willing to take more risks to achieve material wealth. Like in other countries such as Germany and Japan, a failed business is like a scarlet letter, and it's very hard to recover. And a lot of old world countries have a lot more old world hierarchies, and everybody's in their place and traditions, and so as a result it does make it harder to move. Like the best person to really refer to on this is the guy who coined the term, James Turrell Adams, where he says life should be better and richer and fuller for everybody, with the opportunity according to each ability or achievement, regardless of social class or by birth. So again, you can achieve what you want as long as you have the ability and the aptitude and the willingness to put in the effort to succeed. A lot of people criticize the American dream, saying that income inequality and social mobility statistics contradict that narrative. In America, you have a lot more people say than in Europe who are $400 away from falling in overdraft in their bank accounts and having no money. Or the other side of it is that you see a lot of people in the bottom quintile not move up. I think that has a lot to do with the way that the statistics are calculated, and they don't factor confounding variables such as age and education. However, the United States is not a country that everybody is guaranteed a comfortable middle-class life simply by showing up. But in the modern world where showing up is kind of not taken for granted, it actually maybe start to be worth something to do things in person and actually be out there versus just hiding behind the computer screen. But that's neither here nor there. My point is, I think the American dream is more just, it allows for the upside tail, assuming you have, no matter what your origins are, more than everybody's going to get a decent quality outcome even in the worst case scenario. And I think that's why there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the American dream, because I think a lot of people confuse it as everybody should get a middle class or above lifestyle if they go to college, more than offering the right tail opportunity to really achieve generational wealth. The other dream out there is that's starting to emerge in more popularity in the 21st century, even though it's been a thing, I'd say, probably since the 60s, but wasn't really codified until Jeremy Rifkin's book in 2004. is the European dream. The European dream is very different from the American dream, even though the EU and the US have a lot of similarities in terms of Western culture and relatively high living standards. But beyond that, they have actually a very different social contract from each other. Whereas the American dream social contract is about the maximalization of individual rights and liberties and economic opportunity to advance to the top, the European dream prioritizes economic security and not wealth. It's that if you play by the rules of our society, that you will have a comfortable enough of a living standard, and through the democratic process you'll have a say on what the community and the government should do in the future. That is essentially the European dream. It also prioritizes inclusiveness, social safety nets, and social democracy. So in Europe, it's a lot harder to get into the truly upper echelon, or the it's easier, say, to get into the Newport Beach or the Hamptons crowd in the US than it is to get into the Monte Carlo or Zug club in Europe. However, at the same time, for the people, say, like in the bottom half of the population income distribution, your life is probably better in Europe. The government will take care of people with health care. They have a higher social safety net, unemployment protections, more paid vacation. The average country in Europe has 4+ weeks of paid vacation mandated by law, whereas the US, there is no mandatory paid vacation, and the customary amount is 2 to 3 weeks depending on which company you work for and how high you are on the corporate ladder. The upside is it's just, it's a more comfortable life, it's a more predictable life. There's less, I guess, class envy in a way, because most people are kind of in the same bucket, with the tax code there being pretty high across all levels of income and progressive. It's like the difference in standard of living between somebody saying the 90th percentile and the 30th percentile is not nearly as high in Europe as it is in the United States. The downside really is there's less innovation and there's less risk taking, and among ambitious individuals in those countries it could be very frustrating. I've seen it in my own 2 eyes, and I've lived in Asia and lived in San Francisco Bay Area and Southern California, and all really in a lot of places with more economic freedom than Europe. A lot of people from Europe move, who really want to do something in the entrepreneurial path, move to the United States, or they move to Asia or Australia, or places with more economic freedom, than stay on the continent. And I've seen the opposite with people with more modest ambitions, who are Americans, move to Europe, and they're far happier than they would have been in the United States. So I really think it's kind of a trade-off in what you prioritize. Do you prioritize social harmony and everybody kind of being around the same level of living standards and getting along, or do you favor opportunity and the chance to get at the top, in exchange of maybe a few people falling behind and not living as well and having a more unequal distribution of income and living standards? So I think the real difference is whether you prefer the American or the European dream is more of a priority issue than one is economically superior than others. Like in terms of GDP and raw economic production, innovation, growth, the American dream is superior. Seeing the economic growth in the U.S. has outperformed the EU since the 1990s fairly consistently. And the other side, and even as late as early 19th century, income and GDP per capita in America has been higher than in the EU, and especially continental Europe. However, here people show certain statistics of the middle and lower classes being more happy, more access to health care, and more affordable education. The last one of these is the Chinese dream. The Chinese dream consists of sacrificing political rights in exchange for rising living standards every generation. A lot of Americans, and to a lesser extent Europeans and other citizens of developed countries, highly value basic civil liberties such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, maximum internal mobility domestically, and being able to vote and choose who their representatives and leaders of their country are through a democratic process. The Chinese have essentially made the trade, saying, look, we'll be fine with maintaining the one-party state and the CCP Politburo as long as my children's life is better than my life and my life's better than my parents' life at the same age, and this continues to spiral upward. The Chinese dream also emphasizes heavily improved education rates and growing nationalism. Part of that is that assuming your living standards going up is also like my children will have a better education than I am, and therefore can have a better quality job than I have, and be a more well-rounded person. And education is very important in Chinese culture. And this model has been able to work really essentially since the Tiananmen Square protests, where the Chinese government has really focused a lot on economic development and standard of living improvements. And every time there's been a threat to that, they've made sure to align the interests of the policy moves on economic policy enough so that the people will not complain and not rebel on a mass level. There are some harder clampdowns in terms of civil liberties, but they also do this by mixing in enough economic populism with free market growth to keep enough spoils of China's economic success to trickle down to mainstream society. The most recent example of this is while there are recent crackdowns to drive down real estate prices to discourage people from opting out in their local line flat movement. The one critique I have with the Chinese dream, apart from its authoritarianism, is also that what happens when economic growth flatlines, or if skilled labor becomes oversupplied. Say like, it's great, you have a bunch of new engineers in China and there's more engineers there than America, but do you have enough jobs in tech companies or construction firms or within the government or wherever you need engineers to employ all those people you're educating? And when you don't, what are you going to do with a bunch of angry, underemployed, overeducated people? And on top of that, what do you do if living standards don't continue to rise at the same pace, and the first generation has a living standard lower than their parents? At least with the EU and the US dream models, if that happens, the US is selling you an opportunity, not a guaranteed outcome. The EU one is okay with stagnant growth. It actually probably works better for the EU model because you could still have social stability as long as there's strong enough of a safety net to protect those who are not going to be doing as well. I'm not going to get into the fiscal sustainability of that, but that's kind of how those systems adjust for it. Whereas China, their whole trade is basically you give up political freedom in exchange for a near guarantee in living standards. So the government is putting a rock in a hard place if the growth engine of China ever comes to a halt. And that concludes my thoughts on the various socio-economic dreams that dominate three major regions of the world in terms of geopolitical power. Which country's dream do you find the most valid? Which one would you support? Please comment with thoughts. I think we had a great conversation in the anti-work videos, and hopefully we could continue the lively discussion we've been having on recent videos on this one too. Thank you for watching.